Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to our weekly webcast featuring our chairman and founder, Helga Zepp LaRouche. It's January 19th, 2019, and we're in the middle of a whole series of significant breakthroughs and developments. Why don't we start with the one that shocked a lot of people, which was President Trump's announcement that he's going to pursue missile defense and using new technologies. This sounds a little bit like what President Reagan did. And of course, Helga, your husband, Lyndon LaRouche, was on the scene and the author of the SDI policy of Reagan. What do you make of the statement from Trump so far?
Well, while it is very interesting, and many media actually refer to the SDI of President Reagan, I would say I would like to wait and see if it's an offer which is including Russia and China, because that is what the Reagan SDI actually was. Or is it, as some of the commentators also in Russia and Chinese media are worrying, is it an attempt by what one can generally call the war party in the United States to try to establish a superiority in space? And as Global Times, for example, said, is it an effort to make sure that the United States could possibly attack a country with nuclear weapon and not fear that the United States itself would be counterattacked? They call this an illusion which will not work, that it will lead to the destruction of mutual assured destruction and deterrence. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing, because, if you remember, when my husband actually developed what became the SDI, it was the explicit idea to replace mutual assured destruction through the concept of mutual assured survival. Now, this was the response of my husband to the medium-range missile crisis, the Pershing 20 and the SS-20 and the Pershing 2, which had a launch on warning condition at the beginning of the 80s, and the danger of an accidental nuclear war was extremely high. So my husband had, starting in the late 70s, developed this proposal that the two superpowers together would develop new weapon systems based on new physical principles, develop them together, install them together, and in that way make the defensive, for the first time, less costly than the offensive, and in that process making nuclear weapons obsolete. Now, we had at that time, for one full year, so-called back-channel discussions on behalf of the National Security Council of the United States with official representatives of the Soviet Union. And my husband and I were involved in these discussions for one full year. And then, in February 1983, the answer came back from Moscow that they did not like this proposal, with the argument that it would bring the West more advantages than to the Soviets, which, by the way, would not have been true, because President Reagan offered twice, once in March 1983 and again 8 months later, that the United States would help the Soviet Union to apply the breakthroughs in the new military technology, the application of those in the civilian sector, and that way, overcome certain bottlenecks of the civilian economy of the Soviet Union. And, my husband then elaborated this proposal to make it a so-called draft protocol for the superpowers, whereby they would go for a joint science driver program, increasing the productivity of the world economy, and through a gigantic technology transfer to the developing countries would overcome the underdevelopment of the third world. Now, that was the real SDI. So therefore, given the fact that this was a fantastic idea to do away with both the Warsaw Pact and NATO, and it would have changed the course of humanity if it would not have been rejected by the hardliners on both sides, both the Bush faction in the Reagan administration and the Orgakov faction in the Soviet leadership. So it was rejected. But it was a fantastic grand design proposal which would have really overcome geopolitics right there. Now, since Trump made only initial statement, and the 3 representatives from the United States who presented this to the press also, basically said things. One of them was saying this is just in response to the hypersonic missiles of Russia and China. Another one basically said this is not something which will come off the shelf, it will be developed. So it looks like it's a gigantic R&D program at this stage. But the key question, and I insist on that, will it include cooperation with Russia and China, or will it be against them? And that will determine the question, if it is in the footsteps of the SDI or not. And let's hope for the better, because President Trump is seeking a better relationship with Russia. He's doing very good things now with China. He wants to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan. So I absolutely give him the credit of doubt, and let's see what it turns out to be.
And he did say on December 3rd in a press statement that he had this idea that he, President Xi Jinping, and Putin would soon have an opportunity to talk about ending the arms race. And apparently that was one of the topics of the Helsinki discussion with Putin, which got some heat this week from the Washington Post, which said, well, why didn't Trump tell us what went on there? Now, on the so-called Trump scandals, Helga, we had another one that came up and was shot down within hours. But this Buzzfeed report that Michael Cohen had now admitted that Trump told him to lie, within hours, this was shot down. Now, Buzzfeed is infamous because it was the first one to produce the Steele report. What do you make of this insanity?
Well, it is obviously part of the ongoing British intelligence operation in the collusion with intelligence circuits in the United States to, get President Trump out of office one way or another through a coup. It is interesting that even Mueller basically denied that, and he said this is not true. And the boss of Buzzfeed said he sticks to his gun. But as you said, President Trump himself put out a tweet saying that it was Buzzfeed which launched this whole affair with the so-called dodgy dossier of Christopher Steele. And they have a record of being part of this apparatus of using intelligence methods to play such fraudulent stories and play it into the media and then drum it up. But, it just shows that, the need for Trump to declassify all the documents which belong to this whole affair, that this is an urgent need. And funnily enough, this demand came even from the Wall Street Journal, which said that the American people have an absolute right to know this dimension of this whole story themselves. So, one can only hope that President Trump finds the moment right sooner than later, because this really should be stopped for good.
And if the Wall Street Journal is serious about getting the story out, they should run the story on the Integrity Initiative, which we've put out, which is getting circulated somewhat widely. Have you gotten much feedback on the Integrity Initiative story that's out there?
Well, it is funny, there is right now a real buzz among certain circles, both certain politicians who have not come out with it yet. So I think it will come out. It will come out in a big splash, but it is quite scandalous that the mainstream media have not touched it yet. I mean, here you have a story that you have a British-run intelligence operation working through so-called clusters, that is groups of agents of influence in all Western countries, Europe, the United States, now spreading to the Middle East, where they not only meddle in the internal affairs of all the countries, but they also are involved in hyping up anti-Russia war hysteria, actually, leading to being part of a drumbeat for war against Russia and China, and that the mainstream media is not reporting that. Now, the list of people who are belonging to these groups of clusters of agents of influence is now becoming known. There's a lot of investigation being done, and you can expect that big Paukenschlag, as we call it, will come out in the near future. But you should absolutely all get these articles by Barbara Boyd, spread them to the maximum, and get people to really understand that, because if you don't read this role of the British, there's no way how you can understand the present strategic situation.
One of the points Barbara makes in her articles is that it's not just a question of the personnel, but what's the intent? And you just brought up a perfect example. Is the intent of a shift to missile defense an offensive anti-Russian, anti-China policy? Or is it for advancing the cooperation between Russia and China and the United States, which Trump has said he's for? Clearly, the British don't want that to happen. They see that as an end of the special relationship. Now, meanwhile, it looks like Britain itself, the United Kingdom, is becoming more and more irrelevant following this vote on Brexit. What happened with that? Where's this headed?
Well, I think these moves by Theresa May and the Tories were first voting against the deal she made with the EU, then voting for May in the no confidence vote because they are afraid if there are new elections, they all will lose their post and Jeremy Corbyn may be the next prime minister. Now, this has created a situation where practically, as it looks now, no option concerning the Brexit will find a parliamentarian majority. So they have maneuvered themselves in a real cul-de-sac. They are stuck. And it is interesting that even in the Anglo-American media, there is an admission or a discussion about the utter failure of the British establishment. There was a blog, a column in The Economist, which basically says the problem with the British establishment is that they are more concerned about groupthink, about clique dynamics than competence, and that they are a complete failure, that the British model is a complete failure. And even the absolutely pro-British New York Times had an article, the malign incompetence of the British elites, comparing the doings of the present British establishment with those of the British establishment in the time of Lord Mountbatten, namely the time of the Declaration of Independence on the side of India, and the brutal behavior, and this is a quote, the brutal behavior of the British Empire at that time and the absolute stupid behavior now. So there is an admission that, this British neoliberal model, the model which had been absolutely adopted by the European Union, by Bush, by Obama, the neoliberal model which imposed rules favoring the banks to the disadvantage of the population, that model which caused the Brexit revolt, which caused the defeat of Hillary Clinton, which caused the rise and the victory of the present Italian government, and which is really the cause of the Yellow Vest movement in France right now, that model is clearly failing. And, I think it's very scandalous and telling about the condition of the present German elite, or so-called elite, because they just wrote a letter to the London Times, appealing to the British to please stay in the European Union, saying from the bottom of our heart, we want you to stay. I mean, it's totally disgusting. And if it needed another proof that the present German establishment are just the caretaker of that British Empire, and in light, of all the scandals, the coup against President Trump run by the British, the intelligence operations with the Integrity Initiative operation, meddling also in German affairs, hyping people up against Russia, that the German establishment would take such a move and appeal to the Brits to stay in the European Union just shows you that they're really more closely to the British Empire in their mentality than anything else. And even if Germany is the last country where people wake up, it will also happen there. I'm absolutely confident. And, we really have to make sure that positive developments occurring elsewhere eventually also enter German politics, even if it's the last one.
Well, as you've always pointed out, quoting the characters in Wilhelm Tell from Schiller, there is a limit to the tyrant's power. And we're seeing that in the insurgency that's sweeping the so-called advanced world. The yellow vests are out again in Paris and all over France today. And the contrast between France, where Macron is flailing and failing, with the government in Italy, which is moving forward in a determined way, I'm finding a great deal of interest in the work that I do in the United States on radio and elsewhere in these developments. Why don't you give us an update on the differences, for example, between the French situation where the government is paralyzed and Italy where the government is moving ahead?
Well, I mean, the Prime Minister of Italy, Conte, has been in Mali and Niger for the last several days. And in press conferences with the respective presidents, he said that, the Transaqua project, that is the project which the Schiller Institute has been campaigning for decades, in which we finally got to a successful start with memos of understanding between China, Italy, and the 6 countries from the Lake Chad region, namely to bring the water from the tributaries of the Congo River through a system of canals and dams to refill Lake Chad. This project was praised by Conte. He said this is the only way how to address the poverty, how to address the alleviation of the reasons why the migrants are running away from that region, trying to come to Europe, to get rid of the basis for terrorism. So he promised that Italy would become the lawyer for this project in the European Union, because it would be the only way to address the refugee crisis in the human way. So this is very, very good. This is in total contrast to what the EU is doing and what other EU members are doing, because it brings real industrial development to the African continent and therefore addresses the problem in the only possible way. Now, otherwise, I think it was Paolo Savona who said that what is needed today is the revival of the spirit of the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, where great pieces of art inspired science, technology, and the emergence of industrialization in a pre-form. And that spirit of the Italian Renaissance is exactly what is needed. So this is very good. This is also what so far only the Schiller Institute was talking about. And then lastly, Di Maio, the head of the Five Star Party, basically demanded the immediate implementation of the Glass-Steagall Act. And he named it by that name, namely the separation of the banks and, the putting up a firewall between the casino economy and the real economy. So this is all very good, and it shows you that even imperfect governments can come up with many, many good ideas. And I think that Italy right now, for sure, is a star among the European countries. They are for cooperation with China, for the industrialization of Africa, for lifting of the sanctions against Russia. So I think that this is very, very good and a very clear example that even in the context of the dissolving European Union, new ideas can emerge and can be an inspiration for all the other countries. And I would actually like to add one last point. The best development of the recent period was not only the landing on the far side of the moon through China, but they did 2 weeks after their rover and lander were actually landing on the far side of the moon, they were able to get a sprout of a cotton plant, not only to sprout, but even to develop a bud. Now, this little plant has died in the meantime because you have now 2 weeks of no sunshine on the far side of the moon. And because so far there's only solar energy available in that part of the moon, it could not continue to live. But this is the biggest news I can think about, because it proves that mankind has brought biological life for the first time to the moon. This has never happened before, and it's a gigantic step in the direction of future villages on the moon, future interstellar space travel. Naturally, it's only the first baby step, but it proves that it can be done. It could not have been done without man. It means that the creative power of man is the most advanced force in the physical universe, and that, as Kraft Erike said already many decades ago, space travel and space research completely redefines the notion of nature. And it definitely proves we are not living in an earthbound system, but if man can bring life to other terrestrial bodies, this is just a complete first glimpse of what mankind will be capable to do in the future. And it should inspire all of us with a tremendous sense of hope for what we can do if we act in a good spirit and with a good plan.
And in conclusion, I'd say to our viewers, help us get this message out. Use the webcast, these weekly webcasts, so this message of hope and optimism. If we can have a cotton plant bloom on the moon, maybe we can have intelligent life in US and European policy discussions. And that's our job. So work to get these webcasts out and have fun doing it. So Helga, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Yes, I hope so. Till then.